Hey everybody, that is Gary Smith, that is Kaz Kenny,
Kapow!
and I am Betty Bramble, and this is episode 11 of the Blackwaters Edge podcast. Kaz, why don't you get us started with this week's fishing report?
Well, the weather in Maryland, you never know what you're going to get. So it's been hot, hazy, and humid here the last week. Now we're getting ready to be freezing cold and can't move. So fishing this week was actually generally pretty good for the most part. I mean, we didn't see any kind of like boom, but I know some guys, I know a few fellas had over 30 fish in a day. I think we had 14 in a couple hours when we were over there fishing at Key Wallace. So this week it seems like the bite has been pretty good over 335. Some catfish, some big rockfish, some nice bass, and of course quite a few snakeheads. The first yellow perch, I talked to Justin yesterday. He got the first yellow perch in one of his nets. It's only one yellow perch. So that's kind of alarming. You think if one showed up, you'd see more than one. And we only had that one fish. So hopefully yellow perch are coming, and we'll see a few of them here in the next week or so. Over Key Wallace, guys been white perch fishing. Haven't seen any white perch yet. Lots of brown bullheads, few channel cats, few rockfish, and snakeheads. I'm talking to some guys over in the Chick. The Chick's pretty good this week. I don't want to blow it out of the water, but it was pretty good to quite a few guys this week that were fishing over there. So we saw that come alive. Talking to some of the guys fishing on the bridges. Never really saw much in the way of crappie, and they were targeting them. Same thing over at Aries. I did hear that they had about a 1 to 2 hour window bite this week over at Aries, and they did get a few crappie. Most of them were bigger crappie, not much in the way of small crappie. So that's pretty much what we're seeing here on the western shore. I'm hearing some stuff over there, the yellow perch and the white perch. Guys sent me some pictures last night of some really, really big yellow perch, some really healthy yellow perch. So I know that they're moving over there. Up Susquehanna, backside of Garrett Island, they're catching fish in the deep water with tandem jigs, on the bottom with a little bell sinker, just vertically jigging a little bit. They're also catching some off the piers. Some big blue cats and boys been catching up there. A bunch of the West Side Snacks guys, they've been going out there and doing some blue cat fishing. Yeah. I mean, they're big fish. It's kind of alarming. I was talking to some guys up the dam. I actually ran into a guy, not to get into it, but I ran into an old friend of mine last night, Jeremiah, up in Edgewood, and he works at Conowingo Dam. And I was talking to him about, what they see in the turbines with the fish and things like that. And he told me that they don't see very many blue cats up that far, which I kind of found a little alarming. So if anybody has any info on that, I'm curious, are the blue cats up that far to the dam and what they're doing up there? Let's see, anything else we can think of? I think that pretty much covers it. Yeah. So you don't know if you don't go. That's what I always tell you. So get out there and catch them. And, we're going to get cold. So we know the bite's going to slow up here in the next couple of days. Me and Gary were just talking about that and Eddie. And I think you're going to struggle a little bit. But, again, put some time in. You'll find something to take home and eat anyway. And at least you get out and you get to see some pretty eagles flying around and some ducks. And, there's lots of good things to do even when you're not catching fish if you really look
better
around.
than working.
Yep, that's right. So that's where I am with the fishing report, fellas. If you got anything out there in Facebook land, send it to me this week, and we'll plug you up next week, and we'll get a little report out there for you.
All right, so on today's episode, we have Dr. Joe Love from the DNR here today.
Hey, everybody.
How you doing?
I'm all right.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Oh, boy. All right. Well, I'm a fishery biologist. Work for the
Go ahead and
state.
pull that mic up to you just a little bit more there.
All right, sure. I'm a fishery biologist, work for the state. I started working in the department in 2009 as the tidal bass program manager. So my job is to manage bass fisheries in the Chesapeake Bay. And I've been doing that ever since. For the past, say, 11 years, though, I've been jumping into the snakehead bandwagon because we've had a lot of bass anglers concerned about the impacts of snakehead. So I started working on that question about 11 years ago and haven't stopped, really. So I've, in addition to being bass and snakehead, I've kind of moved into a broader role with our invasive species matrix team. So they look to me for questions on blue catfish sometimes, but primarily I try and bring together research on invasive species for the state and for the department as well.
Okay. So you're basically heading on almost a new program for the state then as far as working for the invasive species now. So
Yes. Yeah. We've got a funding source that became available to us a couple years ago from the feds thanks to our aquatic nuisance species plan, which was signed by the governor. So that's great. Now that we have a little bit of money, it's not a lot of money. It's like, we're not talking a lot of money. But we have some money, and that's much better than having no money.
That's right.
So we are using it to try and grapple some questions and issues with things like hydrilla out at Deep Creek Lake, but also snakeheads here and blue catfish here. So now we have some biologists with a little bit of funding so that we can get out and do some more work with invasives.
Okay, fantastic. Before we get too deep into the questions we want to get for them, for the new angler, why don't you just give a little background about snakeheads here in Maryland real quick for us?
Yeah, sure. So snakeheads were introduced here in Maryland in 2002. And since then, we've actually learned a lot about their biology. It's not the first time in the United States they've been introduced. They were in California. I think that was the first state in the late 90s. But in Maryland, we learned that the species is very good at reproducing in our area. So we had one of the first really established self-reproducing populations. And it turned out that they were reproducing in this pond over there in Crofton, Maryland. And after a lot of real great geniuses came together and decided that snakeheads were a problem for the state, they went into the pond and they used some rotenone, which is a poison, and killed the snakehead in addition to the other fish in those ponds. We thought that was the end of it, but it wasn't. We ended up seeing snakeheads in the Potomac in 2004. And as we encountered them, we began learning stuff about what they've been eating and what they do with their life every day. So it's a species that comes from Asia, right? So it's different for the United States. We don't really know much about snakeheads. We don't know much about, or didn't know much about, the family of fish. So there's been kind of a learning curve. And one of the things we've learned is that it's a top predator. They do consume a lot of different things. In addition to fishes, they consume crayfish. When they're younger, they consume crustaceans. And when they get older, they consume a lot of different things. Frogs have pulled out bones from frogs and from their guts. We've seen a mole, a small mammal that likely got blown into the river, and they ate that. So we know they eat a lot of different things. We also know that they grow really fast and they get really big. So we've got a freshwater predator that can get up to 20 pounds, maybe bigger, as Cass was bringing up. And that's pretty significant because this species is great at living in shallow water areas where we wouldn't expect to find top predators. A lot of these shallow water areas are places where younger fish go to seek refuge from big predators. But now we have a predator that can occupy those shallow water areas just fine, and as well as, other deeper water areas where people may be catching bass or crappie.
Right.
So they live and exist in a lot of different areas, ditches. They like grasses, but we've caught them on logs. We've caught them without logs. We've caught them in deep water. So we're talking really kind of like a generalist.
Just about everywhere.
Just about anywhere. And that's why the species is spread out. So now they're not just in the Potomac River. We see them in all of the major rivers of the Chesapeake Bay right now. And now they've also moved into non-tidal areas above Great Falls and Conowingo. So,
and the reservoirs, too. I mean,
yeah.
Loch Raven, and we know they're in there now.
That's right. Yep. They were probably introduced there. And it's not just a problem now for Maryland any longer because they're in Arkansas.
That's right.
And they've spread it to
Georgia.
That's
Mississippi
right.
River, yeah.
Mississippi River. That's right. So I think some of these other states are going to be looking toward the Mid-Atlantic region here for information on how to deal with them. So that's what we're trying to do now.
And the crazy thing is we're still learning about them.
That's right.
It's unreal how all these other guys are going to be running through these same problems in the next 20 years or so. And we still don't have the answers yet, so.
Which is tragic, really. But, it's only been 15 years. Right. And as I said, it's kind of tough sometimes to get resources together when you don't have money. But we've been able to leverage our resources with other states and try and work toward answering some questions. I think we're in a better position now, and we can provide good information to some of these other states that are now having the problem that we were.
And that's really good that you guys are making yourself available to help the other communities out. You know what I mean? Because I think I've had some questions come to myself from some folks in Georgia. You know, what habitat am I looking for in there?
Yeah.
Where am I supposed to be looking to see?
Yeah.
So I think that's great. I think that opens up a big door for you guys to even gather maybe some more resources to help more than just the state of Maryland. You know.
Yeah, and early on, it was like this mystique for the fish, right? People were seeing it as a monster. It was in some horror movies, and people were really scared about Snakehead, and I think that kind of generated a lot of interest, and a lot of people were asking questions about, where they, what to do when they encounter them, and will they eat everything in the rivers? So that kind of pointed to us because we had to kind of answer those questions early on, and now we have anglers out there who are a tremendous resource of information. They've been sharing information with me for years. They'll call up and tell me what's going on, what they're seeing. They're doing it more frequently now because snakeheads are more widespread now.
Right.
And so thanks to you guys, your listeners, and you guys for reporting on that information, because I think that kind of stuff has really pushed us further into the know. And without it, I think we would be much further behind.
And you've heard me touting this the whole campaign and the whole time we've been going. And my big thing is this. If you see something, say something.
That's right.
If you see something, say something.
That's right.
You know what I mean? That's what we need. And to hear you say you're asking the anglers for some help.
Right.
So any of you anglers out there that haven't given Joe any help, want to give him a little bit of help, feel free to give him a call and tell him about what you're seeing in the area. Remember, if you see something, say something.
That's
so
right.
yeah, I mean, that's
to
definitely.
to hear him say it makes a difference. Really,
Yes.
really reinforces the fact that everybody really needs
And
to.
and let's take down that wall that they're not here to help us. DNR is here to help us, period. That's what they're here for. Whether you want to believe it or not, that's what they're here for.
Yep.
So,
And look, we share that information too, with the feds, at conferences. We talk to biologists and researchers and our own folks. I work for the governor's office essentially, right? Part of that branch. But I also I just provided some information on electrofishing to the General Assembly members. So we talked to the legislative side as well. And, any information from anglers can be helpful because not only are we providing it to other states and biologists, but also to our own government here in Maryland who are making decisions every day on fisheries.
I know for me as an angler that, it's my responsibility, so I ask anglers out there, to do your part, reach out to Joe, talk to him. If you've got a question, that's what these guys are here for. I've been telling you guys for months, you want to ask me the magic questions. That's the man you want to ask some magic questions to, folks.
Well, I'm okay with them asking Kaz. Let me just go on record. I just can't go on record and say.
He's going to go back tonight and got 3,000 emails tonight he's got to listen to.
I think Kaz is a really good resource. You can reach out to him. It's just fine. He's a very smart guy.
So you classified them as a freshwater species.
Yes.
But they are tolerant to saltwater to some degree. Do you know exactly how tolerant they are to saltwater?
Yeah. So they've run some tests. Fish and Wildlife Service ran some tests with that as well. And I believe it's 10, 12 parts per thousand, which may not mean a lot to people who don't know the scale. But saltwater ranges anywhere between fresh, so 0 parts per thousand, up to seawater, which is about 36 parts. So here, about 12, we're talking about middle to lower end. So they are brackish water species, but they don't really thrive in that environment, right?
Okay.
We one of the first pictures I saw was interesting. I mean, it was at the mouth of the Potomac River, and this was back in 2011, I think. One of the guys was fishing a stingray tournament or a cow nose ray tournament, something, and he took a picture of a snakehead sitting on a sandbar with crystal clear water. So it's obviously a snakehead just hanging out there. Took a picture and sent it to us. We measured the salinity. It was during June or July, and so the salt was 15, 16 parts at that time. And that's what I shot that picture over to John Odenkirk and others, and I said, well, this is how they're spreading from the Potomac to the Rap or to other rivers. They're moving out of the mouth and moving out. So they can do that, but we definitely do not see reproducing populations in those brackish water areas. It's typically a freshwater fish.
Have you observed when they get into that salt water that they seem to weaken out? The color seems to change a little bit. It seems like they just get a little unhealthy.
I don't think they stay there long enough for that to happen naturally.
Right.
Now, if you subject them to living in that environment chronically, they'll die, particularly the juveniles. But naturally, they don't stay in those areas. They may move through them, but they know what's good for them, and they know that much salt is not
the
good for
reason
them.
I asked that question is last year I was down at Smithville Boat Ramp on Smithville Road, and that's a pretty salty area at times, especially in the summertime. And we had a real heavy rain that had come through there. And me and I forget who I was fishing with that day. But we looked down and I said, "Dang, man, there's a snakehead, man." And it was kind of acting like not normal, like it was darting from one side of the river to the other, and darting to the other side of the river, and then darting to the other side of the river. And when it got over to the other side, it got into some shallow water. And we were able to get up on that fish and kind of look at it. And the first thing that I realized or noticed about the fish was the color seemed like he was vibrant here on the tail, but then it was like dull here, and then his whole face was all dull.
I have noticed when they're more stressed out that their color seems to darken. They lose that vibrance to bright browns and stuff like that.
And that's kind of like what I was kind of wondering is like, we know they're tolerable. How tolerable,
right?
And that's something that I was curious of is can they come out that mouth and can they make it 10 miles up the bay?
How long are they tolerable?
To another river system? That was kind of, and when I saw that firsthand, I kind of thought, oh, man, that probably be tough for them to get out of here and then go up to Y Mills. You know what I mean? So I don't know. So that's why I asked you that, just because I'd seen that in that one fish. Now that's the only fish I had seen like that. You know what I mean? So
yeah, I think some early on, people were thinking that the snakeheads can move out on these freshettes, right? So saltwater stratifies in the river, so they can, it's more salty in the bottom parts of rivers, right? So folks were thinking, well, snakeheads can move on the surface, and they probably do because they do require oxygen, right, to breathe from the air.
Yeah.
So that makes sense. They can move in those systems even when it's a little salty.
So realistically, they can live anywhere.
Yeah, but they're not reproducing.
Right. That's the big key to it. Is even though they can use that, almost use the Chesapeake Bay to spread more, they're not going to reproduce inside of the bay, and I think that's important to understand.
Yeah. So. It actually makes people happy, I think, because they don't want to see snakeheads in the lower end.
I don't think we're going to see guys trolling parachutes for 36-inch stripers in May, pulling in rock or pulling in snakeheads. You know, I mean that's kind of what I would.
That's right.
Well, I mean we don't know, but let's hope
we don't know. Let's hope.
Let's hope not. Yeah. So you worked with Josh Newhard on the study here in the Blackwater.
I did. Yeah.
And we had Josh on. What was it, about 4 or 5 weeks ago? It's been a while now.
Yeah, I
6
remember.
or 7. I think.
Yeah, but so can you go in a little bit about your study there?
Yeah, sure. That was actually pretty exciting, I thought.
It was great.
Yeah, we did this work. So before I got to the department in 2009, I worked at University of Maryland Eastern Shore, and that's where I met Josh, and we worked together on the Blackwater project. And there we worked with Fish and Wildlife Service, the Maryland office. And we surveyed the Blackwater River system mainly because they were putting in a weir to try and restore that area for anadromous fish. They wanted to make it fresher.
Right.
And so we did these surveys. It actually lasted longer than the study was reported.
That was because they were delayed in installation. Is that why? Or
no, some of it was preliminary work, but I worked out there for about 3 or 4 years, just trying to understand the system and surveying it. Josh did some follow-up research with white perch after that project, so we've been out in Blackwater for a while. But then he moved to Fish and Wildlife, and I moved to the department. And when snakeheads were first reported from Blackwater, I still remember the phone call. Some guy caught it off the footbridge at the Blackwater River, and he caught a snakehead. I'm like, oh, that's not good. That was like 2010, 2011. I'm like, this is like, because that was the nightmare for us at the office. I was talking to my boss, who's the chief of inland fisheries, and he's like, the minute they get on the eastern shore, they're going to spread out because of all the low, it's all low elevation, canals, ditches. Perfect habitat.
So you guys had already had that conversation.
Before it even happened, we had that conversation. And then when snakeheads were caught on the footbridge, I was like, that because Blackwater.
You were like, what?
That's exactly.
You're like, what? I love that.
Yeah. Because Blackwater was actually a beautiful system for me. It was one of my first introductions to Maryland, and because I originally come from Louisiana, and Blackwater was just a beautiful marsh area, and I love the marsh because I'm a Louisiana boy, So that was very tragic, and I saw what happened since then. And then Josh was telling me, hey, the refuges, drained their ponds for wild waterfowl and found all these snakeheads in the ponds. I'm like, oh, this this really is not a good day. And a few years after that, I called Josh and talked to him, and I said, this might be a good opportunity to go out and repeat the study so that we can see if there's been any change in the fish community. Because usually these fish communities don't change a whole lot, especially in an area where there's not a lot of land development or other factors. So they tend to be pretty stable. And Blackwater is an important nursery for fishes. It just is. That's what it is. It was historically a freshwater nursery, and that's why all that money was spent for the weir structure to try and restore it. So we wanted to get out there and see what the impacts were. And I think you guys are familiar with the research now. You know what we saw. So we were out there and we did pretty much the same type of survey. Went out there monthly, set these fyke nets, fished them, and I tell you what, I was actually devastated because I did love the Blackwater.
And see, that's me.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm right there with you.
Yeah, and when we were pulling up fyke nets, and I was seeing how few white perch, and I remember, because my memory's not that bad, I remember what we were pulling in 2006, 2007. I remember that, and I was seeing what we were pulling in. I was like, I don't know what's going on, but this is not normal. This is not the way. And every month, I felt like I was telling Josh, well, let's just see what happens next month. I said, you know what, yellow perch haven't started, but let's see when they start running. Let's see when the white perch start running. Let's see, maybe the numbers will tick up. And it just didn't. And I was not happy. And then we, went through the data analysis and saw what we saw, and now we are where we are. And it's unfortunate. I mean, it's still a nursery. It's just not as productive as a nursery as it used to be.
So we went from basically, you caught thousands of perch and crappie to basically hundreds at that point.
Yes, and it was. I had never, as a fishery scientist, I had never seen something so remarkable within a 10-year period. I mean, it's just, for me, it was very telling. And it's interesting because, the work that was coming out of the Potomac is indicating there wasn't a whole lot of change, and even, some of John Odenkirk's latest stuff out of the reservoirs in Virginia indicated, well, they're not really seeing a change in bluegill, in that case, bluegill relative abundances. So I was really surprised to see these changes here at Blackwater. That said, I wasn't too terribly surprised because another conversation I had with the chief of inland fisheries back in the day was, well, this is a top predator. And it just makes sense that when they become abundant, we're going to see a consequence.
Right.
And that's exactly, it's really not rocket science. It's really not rocket science. And that is what we saw. We saw a consequence to having that predator out there.
So you mentioned John Odenkirk's research. Can you explain some of the differences between his research and your research and the different findings you're having between the two of them?
Yeah, so we're all trying to get to answering what the overall impacts of snakehead introductions are, and it's we're doing that in different ways. John's got a survey on the Potomac River just like we do, and one of the first things that we were both paying attention to is what the impacts to largemouth bass might be. And, we saw changes in the relative abundance of bass, but we think it was habitat related and not snakehead related. And he basically saw little change in the bass population on his side of the river, but we've kind of reasoned, both of us, that in either case it's not really snakehead related. Bass themselves are a really important top predator, and they're formidable, and they're invasive in some places in this world, right? South Africa, Japan. They can hold their own.
The blue crab's invasive in Spain right now. They're having a terrible problem with that. So it all depends on your environment and what they're used to.
That's exactly. Brook trout are horrible out west, and we're trying to fight to keep them here. So, bass can hold their own, right? So we weren't too surprised there, but unfortunately, on the Potomac River and the tribs there, the streams there, we don't have like a dedicated study to the tidal freshwater tribs to document what species are there, what relative abundances there are. John doesn't either. So we both agencies really look at bass and snakehead in those cases. But John's work, most recent work on the impoundments, kind of showed, him and Mike Eisel showed that the abundance of bluegill hadn't changed over a 4-year period. And snakeheads there were introduced in 2015, and they've kind of tracked them. They hadn't, and so those abundances didn't really significantly change. That's interesting. We on Blackwater system saw something different, and so to reckon those two studies, I would say that that first they're different systems,
and that's a big point.
Yeah, and even in John's paper on that, and Mike Eisel's paper on that, they acknowledge that. They say, look, different systems, different productivities, there could be different effects. We acknowledge that as well. So that's important. Secondly, the introduction history is important. So snakeheads have been in Blackwater longer than in John's impoundment. So they've got a leg up of at least 5 years out here, which means that they've had 5 more years to reproduce and establish themselves.
And I think we really saw our biggest collapse come after that 5-year mark. I mean, really,
I believe you. And so I mean that itself could matter. And so who knows what's going to happen out in John's neck? And he's again acknowledged that it's a short time period they've looked at, and so who knows what's going to happen. Some of the kickback that we've received is, well, you guys are just really comparing 1 year to another year, right? You're just comparing 2006 to 10 years later. Well, that's true. And maybe there are other things that could influence what we're seeing. I would argue the same is a problem for John's study, right? Because if his bluegill population shoots up or drops down, people are going to have the same comments. They're going to be like, oh, well, it was a wet year. It was a dry year. It was a warm year or
we
whatever.
Had 3 inches of salt fall from the sky this year.
Right, yeah. Martians are out there. They're just checking. So, I don't know, right? So there's always going to be that. There's always going to be that criticism. And we take it. There's been a lot of discussion between me and John and the other agencies, Delaware, on.
Yeah, I want to get into that later. PA, Delaware, Jersey, where are they all at? But
right.
Anyway, that's later.
Yeah, so we're all kind of chatting with one another, and that's the thing about science, and I wish people understood more, is that it's messy. And we're early in the science on this.
That's right. That's exactly right.
So we're still learning. It's not as if anyone's lying or someone's work is better than another's.
Right.
What we're doing is trying to, do work that's competent so that in 10 or 15 or 20 years, we have a better understanding of what the impacts of snakehead are and where they're going to impact systems more than others. So that's what we're doing, and it's messy, and that's okay for us. But I know some people like concrete answers. Like, is there a problem, or aren't they a problem?
I think that's the biggest issue we've been having is people have misconstrued our position on snakeheads. We're all about trying to preserve what we have. It's not like we're anti-snakehead.
Yeah.
We've never been anti-snakehead. We all enjoy catching these fish.
Yes.
Yeah.
We all just also enjoy responsible harvesting because we believe that's helping the Blackwater system better than anything else at this point.
And it's the only option that we have here in Blackwater. We don't have the resources to electroshock. We don't have that.
Yeah.
So the only way that we can control and keep the numbers, I don't know what the word is. Keep the numbers wherever the numbers are going to be is through the angler. Through the commercial guy, through the angler with his hook and line, and me with my spear in the ditch.
Well, and that's it. I mean, I don't think anyone in the department is anti-snakehead either.
Right.
I mean, we want people to go fishing for them.
Sure.
You're right. That is the way to go, particularly out here. In Asia, people fish for them regularly. Now sport fishing for snakeheads is more popular out there. But people have been eating snakehead for years, if not decades and centuries.
That's the biggest problem.
Asia, And I would love to see that here. Unfortunately, we have to develop that mindset. I work as a bass guy with a lot of people who practice catch and release. That's just their mindset. They want to release the fish for the betterment of the industry, for the betterment of the fishery. I get it. But it's hard to convince those folks that they should harvest snakehead. And if all people do is catch and release snakeheads, then it's going to become a bigger problem. And unfortunately, that's not what we want, right? I would love to get us to a system similar to maybe Asia, where they're native, where people are eating them, they're commercially marketed, It's a hard fish to get at commercially.
Yeah, it really is.
It really is, So recreational anglers are going to be the ticket, unless some new technology develops within the commercial sector.
Drone fishing.
Yeah.
Drone fishing. That's actually a good idea. I'd like to see how that would work.
Blackwater wouldn't want us doing that.
Absolutely not.
No, that's a federal thing, right?
Can you ask for forgiveness in that situation instead of
Probably.
permission?
You
Probably.
can ask. You can ask for anything.
That's right.
Yeah, behind bars, maybe.
That's right.
Yeah. But I think you guys are what you're doing is great. Promoting this. It's a new fishery, and promoting it, intelligently and getting people out there. It's hard to get people off the couch.
That's
You
exactly
guys are
right.
doing it.
Yeah.
So thank you guys for doing that, because that's actually the hard work,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, everybody knows that in the beginning, I was that guy too, man. Hey, look, a snakehead, man. Oh my God, this is awesome. I'm not telling anybody. I'm keeping my mouth shut. I'm gonna keep blah 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 blah. And, just see something, say something.
That's
It's,
right.
it's like the catch and release. I'm a big catch and release bass guy. And crappie to some degree. If they're real big, I usually throw them back. But I don't throw snakeheads back. I generally don't go unless I'm going to eat them or I'm taking somebody else fishing.
And it's like guys that they'll message me and be like, "Hey man, can I get one of your secret spots?" I'm like, "Look, I ain't got secret spots. I'm not hiding spots. I'm not in the save the
Wallace.
snakehead business. Here, I'm going to send you 9 pins, man. Get ready."
That's right. My secret spot is Key Wallace. Not much to it. So, Joe, we had a couple questions come in. One guy, he wanted to know, is it possible or practical to monitor interactions in habitats by camera through various stages of breeding, nursing, or feeding seasons?
Like a GoPro camera?
Almost like that,
Underwater GoPro camera?
but almost like a continuous monitoring system, though, for that.
Oh, yeah. I'd love to see that. I'd love to see it for bass, actually. That's something I've been thinking about for years. I think that would be cool. With snakeheads or bass, I've learned that it can be a challenge. It's like an eagle cam, I guess.
Right, exactly, yeah.
It's a pain in the neck because the way snakeheads operate, they don't stand still, right? So they move around a lot. We could try and do it in our hatchery, right, and stick a camera under there. We could, do it possibly if people were interested in seeing kind of, nesting behavior, but it would be a long time series, right? If that was something of interest to people, maybe I could talk with our folks at Office of Communications. We have a couple of GoPros and we could try it.
Might be worth something to look into.
Mm-hmm.
He also wanted to know, is there evidence of any game species of fish thriving or coexisting with the snakeheads because of the availability of specific types of habitat that allows them to survive?
Well, we know that bass and snakehead live in the same areas. We know that they kind of do the same things, right? We also know that snakeheads live in other areas than bass can't, they can live in areas without oxygen, but bass don't, So we do know that they coexist in similar habitats. And, I imagine, you're going to be catching sunfish as well, if you consider that a game fish, in areas where you would be catching snakehead as well. So, yeah, we do know that they coexist.
I think the important thing to remember that is it all depends on the habitat. So, like here in the Blackwater, the habitat, they're not coexisting as much as they are in the Potomac.
Right. Well, and we just, honestly, you don't have as many bass over here as you do on the Potomac.
That's true,
right?
too.
So on the Potomac, like I was mentioning, we probably have the largest population of bass of the tidal rivers. And over here, it's just not a very big bass fishery relative to other areas at all. That doesn't mean there aren't bass here. It's just not as many of them. And, I guess were they thinking that, just kind of curious about why the question was asked. Were they thinking that maybe
I think
snakeheads couldn't coexist?
Well, I think that they're trying to determine what kind of a habitat it takes for them to coexist peacefully, whereas without one taking over the other, I think is what the basis of the question is.
I don't think that. No.
Yeah, I don't know that. Yeah, that's gonna happen. It's there's just not enough information out there to really look at competition for habitat.
Right.
That said, snakeheads are such a generalist that I think they could figure out a way. I don't to exist. The bass or something else that may get chased out, they may have more specialized habitat considerations, so they may get forced out of some areas, but there's just not been a whole lot of work on that yet.
While I'm thinking about it, you just said a big word, forced out. And a lot of guys, we were talking about this earlier, a lot of guys are coming in on post and saying,
Hold on, time out. You just called forced out a big word.
It's a very meaningful word. Right? Meaningful
Shoot, I really thought I said something wrong I didn't know about, man. I just almost peed my pants.
There's another F word there.
What did he say?
Yeah.
Okay, so like this whole forced out thing.
Yeah.
If these fish, let's say in the Chick, or let's say in the Trans, or let's say up Egypt Branch, or let's say over in Key Wallace, or let's say up at the Footbridge, or let's say any of these places, a lot of guys want to come back in a comment and say, well, there's a good chance those snakeheads forced those fish out, which, yes, that could be very possible. Now, from a realistic standpoint, here at the refuge and talking to all the guys who fish here and work the refuge, if 300,000 yellow perch were pushed out at 335,
Yeah.
we'd see them somewhere else in this river system where the commercial guys are working netting. We'd see those fish somewhere.
Yeah.
If these white perch, if these resident white perch were pushed out of here, we'd see them somewhere else.
Yeah.
Right? So
That's right.
So that's kind of like what I want to. I just wanted to jump on that while we had that word out there, the word forced out, because we were talking about that earlier, and I was talking to you about some of the people that are coming back to me and saying, hey, well, the snakeheads moved in, so they pushed the bass out. The snakeheads moved on the bass spawning grounds. That's why they didn't spawn there. No.
Yeah, I think these fish are a lot more. They're not as specialized as maybe people think.
Right.
They live in an estuary.
Right.
It's a harsh environment, and these fish are adapted to living and rolling with the punches. That's just how they do. So, for one species to force out another species, requires a lot of habitat specialization. And I just don't see that with these fish. I don't think we're there. If people are not catching white perch or yellow perch in areas where there's snakehead now, it could be that the populations for white perch and yellow perch are depressed. There just aren't as many of them as there used to be. It could be that people are hooking into more snakehead because there are more snakehead out there, so they're just more frequently hooking to snakehead. But for them to be pushed out, that would require a lot, and I just don't. Kaz, you're right. I think if they were, we would see that. And
this is the other thing I want to go back to now, because we've been hearing this. I've had this conversation with a couple guys here the last couple weeks about the whole carp and the shad. Boom. Okay, and the numbers. As we have lost relative abundance of this size of fish. Now, you've been on the Fike study. You've seen what's coming in the nets. It's a lot of big stuff. It's not a lot of smaller stuff.
It's a lot of carp.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah. So let's say hypothetically, or my hypothesis is this. We have removed over the last 5 years, because that's when we've seen our boom come, these last 5. So over the last 5 years, we've taken out the smaller bluegill. We've taken out the smaller bass. They're gone. We've taken out the crappie, or the smaller crap. We've taken out the yellow perch. We've taken out a lot of the smaller fish that are responsible for eating the reproductive cycle of those smaller fish that feed the whole community, which are those bass and those shad.
Yeah.
That is basically the food source here in the refuge for these fish, probably, let's say 60, 70% of what they're eating. You know what I'm saying? So that being the case, we take those little fish out that are responsible for eating those juveniles. 5 years worth of this depleting and dropping in numbers will definitely cause the carp and that shad number to boom the way it has.
What you're talking about is kind of like a trophic cascade effect, where you're seeing a change at the productivity as a result of this new species in the water. And certainly that's something biologists, ecologists look look to study. We're not there yet,
Right.
but it's definitely a possibility that we will have seen this. We have seen some dramatic changes
I mean,
in
I'm
community out there.
I'm just thinking, over the years,
Yeah.
back when I used to harvest a lot of bluegill to eat and a lot of crappie to eat, and I'd cut them stomachs open. I mean, that's what was in a lot of them little crappie stomachs was them just that big little shad, that big little whatever, little perch, something like that. You know what I
Yep.
mean?
Yep.
I just
Well, when you throw the ecosystem off a little bit, it's going to have to adjust.
right.
And that's actually, I would just want to go back. We were talking about forcing fish. We know that the environment. You talked about the cold snap. We know that those things really matter. Salinity will force fish to move in other areas. Those are big drivers. But another thing is resources, food. So if you're not seeing a lot of young forage fish, then you may not see as many big bass, or those big bass may be like looking for areas where those small forage fish are. So they may not be in the same spot simply because they're looking for food, not because necessarily they're forced out by snakehead. It's not as if there's aggression of snakehead and bass. But they could be just searching for other areas to forage. So that's an important thing I'd want to mention too. So
Gotcha.
Joe, I know Western Shore compared to the Eastern Shore is a big difference. Our rivers over here are fairly shallow, but we do have the Pocomoke, which I believe is the narrowest, deepest river in the United States.
that's right.
What about the Upper Pocomoke? Are they finding snakeheads in there?
Yeah, they are. Yep. Our survey crews have turned them up. I've had anglers catching. I was talking to Scott Sewell.
Yeah, he does a lot of tournaments in the Pocomoke.
Yep. He caught them. Sent me a picture. I talked to Bruce Wooten. He's on this side of the bay too.
I know Bruce.
Yeah.
Very well.
Yeah, and he caught one too. Just sent me a picture. So from the Pocomoke. So yeah, I know that they're out there. What we don't know is how established they are. We know that Blackwater, this area is pretty thick with them, but Pocomoke we're not sure of yet.
And one thing Pocomoke has that the Blackwater doesn't have is they have some very large garfish,
Yeah,
which are a top predator.
they do. And maybe there's going to be some control there. You know?
that might help control the population.
That's something I've wondered about the marshy hope over there because they have them in there. Most I've caught in a day might be 2 or 3.
Right.
I know they're there, but I've talked to some other anglers there, and one of the guys told me he had a car that he took and cut it and had 3 snakeheads in it.
There you
that's
go.
awesome. That's awesome.
There you go.
So
Breeding garfish.
so maybe
now.
we should start
That's
releasing.
right.
So do we start releasing gar into the refuge now?
I don't know that they'd survive too well out here. They might. I don't know.
So does DNR consider snakeheads to be established in basically all the Chesapeake tributaries now at this point?
I think so. Yeah. All the major ones at least. We know that they're reproducing populations.
That's
Do
crazy.
you know how many states they're in now?
Well, we know in the Mid-Atlantic region, we know that they're in Delaware. We know they're in Pennsylvania. We know Maryland and Virginia. There was one caught in West Virginia at the boat dock. Yeah, but I don't think it's it could have just been brought there.
Right.
People don't think that there's an established population there yet. But we also know that snakeheads are in New York, Florida,
Jersey.
Hawaii, Jersey, Georgia. We know one was
Are you talking to any of the fellows in Jersey or PA or?
Yeah, so
What are they doing? Because between me and you, I understand that there's a pretty good jag of them up around Philly, and a couple of places up there, and some of the ponds and near the airport, and So what are
Yeah.
they doing?
Well, I don't know what they're doing except that I know they don't want them because they were concerned that the fish lift at Conowinga would bring them to them.
Right.
But I don't think they're really pushing hard on this harvest idea like we are. And to my knowledge, they're not dropping rotenone into the ponds to kill them.
Okay.
But to be fair, Pennsylvania really hasn't sat at our table to talk to us about what they're doing.
Come on down,
in terms
PA.
of,
Come on down.
In terms of snakehead, we have a task force meeting, a snakehead task force meeting that Josh hosts every year, usually in February or March. And Virginia's there, Delaware's there, we're there, DC is there. I think we ought to bring in Pennsylvania now that they're more aware of the issue, and they're trying to
New
combat
Jersey's
it.
getting a lot of them in their mill
Yeah.
ponds, they're saying.
Yeah, is that right?
Yeah.
Well, Jersey might need to be part of the mix too. We did have this Snakehead symposium. I don't remember Jersey being down there, but we're trying to amass some information so that folks like Jersey might reach out and figure out how we're dealing with it. Maybe it'll help them deal with the problem too.
I mean, I just see some of the Jersey places that I've seen the pictures of
That's
and
a lot
things
of
like
pictures,
that.
yeah.
I mean, it looks like a lot of the same habitat that we have here.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
that's right.
So, but I also know that they're a little bit of a colder climate. So I think in them colder climates, they're seeing something different than maybe what we're seeing here. So that might be part of the problem too. I don't know.
Well, I'm curious to see how that's going to work. I looked at. I know that they can tolerate down to 0 degrees, right?
Right.
Okay.
I've seen them under ice. I know that.
Right.
Some of the modeling that's been done, if you look at the symposium stuff from last year, year before last, whenever that was, you see that there's definitely they do better in these low elevation areas. So that's why I think they're doing better on the eastern shore. But they're going to do really well in Louisiana if they ever get down there.
Yeah, that's great. That's basically just another version of the Eastern Shore.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But it's harder to tell what they're going to do in those upper elevation areas because that model didn't really include a lot of data from the upper elevation stuff because over here we don't really see them. But we do know that they do live in upper elevation areas in Asia. So as they expand their range in the watershed, and as we see what happens in Jersey or New York, I think we'll learn a lot more about that thermal tolerance and how well they do.
So while we're on this subject about cold temperatures, things like that,
Yeah.
me and you were talking a little bit about the growth rate and the rapidness of the growth rate here in the refuge.
That's right. Yep.
So, I think I was explaining to you, the difference I see here as opposed to like Russia
Yeah.
or other colder climate areas. I think that because our snakeheads never get that period of dormancy, let's call it. I don't want to call it hibernation because I don't buy any of that. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So let's just say they're in their dormants, they're laying dormant for 3 months, they haven't ate. Where here, our fish never do that. Our fish slow down. Once that
You
water
might
drops
get-
below 40,
You might get February.
right? But I'm just saying, it'll slow down a little bit once water temperatures. But as soon as we get 3 warm days,
There's
it's
usually
like
at
they
least
wake
1
back
week a
up, and
month.
once they're fully awake, it's like boom, and then till it gets cold again, and then it's all right, man. Let me relax for a couple of days. My belly's full. Blah 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 blah. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I know what
So
you're saying.
so I think the reason that we're seeing such a rapid growth rate, is part of that. But one of the independent biologists I was telling you about that I've been talking to seems to believe that the growth rate that he's seeing here is by far faster than anywhere else that it's been surveyed. And we were talking a couple weeks ago about why they may be growing so fast here as opposed to other areas, that he has looked at.
Yep.
And me and you were talking. I told you I figured out something here recently with the MPT filming when me and Eddie were over there and we were fishing. I was standing on a rock that was angled like this, and I kept seeing snakeheads come in with their head to the rock, almost like they were scraping it. So I went to the net, or went to the truck and grabbed my shrimp net or butterfly net, and I went along the rocks. That son of a gun was that deep in grass shrimp. So right there, gizzard shad,
Yeah.
carp, shrimp.
Yeah.
Right there's the protein. Right there's the food source, and right there's the rip fuel to make them go. You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying?
Yep.
And then we're not coupled with the fact that we don't get a month or 2 month or 3 month dormancy. We're feeding year round. I know over in the Potomac, them fish shut down. They drop off when it gets cold. They drop off here, but unlike Potomac, if you get 2 or 3 warm days over there, it doesn't seem to fire them up, so to say. You get
Yep.
2 or 3 warm days, they're fired back up like piranhas, man.
Yeah, man, it could be.
So-
I mean, I tell you, the growth rate stuff early on, it was reported, I think, out of Odenkirk's shop. They were looking at what the growth rates were for those fish. They tended to be a bit faster than other places in the world where they're established.
Yeah.
And then some work that Josh was involved in indicated that the growth rates were even faster than what John had thought. And that's on the Potomac.
Right.
Now, if you're saying here that you think the growth rates are faster than on the Potomac, then I have to say that your colleague, your friend there, he's probably right. Probably.
Well,
fastest.
because we were talking a while back, I forget, somebody was on the show, and we were talking about how fast they grow in a year. And that's kind of like how the conversation came
Yeah.
up.
Yeah.
And he was like, well, that not saying that that's wrong, but what I'm seeing here is not that. What I'm seeing here is a couple more inches than what you guys are talking about.
And that very well could be. I mean, there's a lot of food. We talked about out here being. You talk about grass shrimp.
Yeah.
But these fish, even in their first year of life on the Potomac side, they'll start eating other fish, right? And once these fish start eating fish, growth rates spike.
Right.
So here we're talking about a predator that grows quickly outside of the gape width of a lot of other predators, right? And it can start consuming young fish at an early age. So that's a recipe for just faster growth and survival. And so that's what we end up seeing. And I wouldn't be one bit surprised if the fish here on the Eastern Shore grow faster. They've been saying that for bass for years.
These bass grow fast.
Yes,
over here,
on the
boy.
Eastern Shore they grow big, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't see why you wouldn't see the same thing for snakehead.
All right. So how are we doing on time, Eddie? We still good?
Doing okay right now.
Okay. So I want to go into I got two more things I want to lead into, and I'm trying to do this in succession. So blue cats.
Yeah.
Let's talk about blue cats for a minute. Okay. In the refuge, in the chick, in the trans, little Blackwater, exclude Marship. Let's just talk about the complex, okay? Because a lot of guys want to keep going back to blue cats. We don't have the numbers of blue cats anywhere in the complex, so to speak, like Nanacoke or like Marshy Hope,
Yep.
or like any of those deep-bodied rivers.
Yep.
People need to understand we have pretty much 3 catfish here primarily that I'm aware of: the white catfish, the brown bullhead, and the channel cat. And that's the only 3 that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if we have mad toms or not in the refuge or not, so doubt it. But either
We
way,
haven't pulled one out.
right? Either way, the blue cats aren't an issue. So elaborate a little bit on that and what blue cats need to survive, and just try to explain to the public why this ecosystem isn't really conducive to their successful thriving, let's say.
Yeah, so we hadn't pulled out a blue catfish from the Blackwater River or the Little Blackwater River, and there's a reason for that. They're not, you pointed to it. They're shallower water. It's a shallow water area. Now, the blue catfish tends to be a big river species that likes deeper water. So you'll find them around deep dock areas or in the main channel of rivers. That doesn't mean they won't enter, shallow waters to feed,
Sure.
and they do, but they need that deep water. So we see them. I remember when I was out on the Marshy Hope, we were with our bass survey, and we were electrofishing around around one of the bridges, and all these blue catfish just started coming out. It was the first time I'd seen blue catfish on the Marshy Hope. It was a few years ago. And they were like ridiculous numbers, 100, 200 blue catfish. They were all small
in there.
coming up on the Marshy. That's because of the type of habitat that you see out there. It's just that deeper water area. Yeah, I come from Louisiana. Blue catfish are part of our culture there. Yep. Blue catfish, channel catfish, and we all eat catfish.
What part of Louisiana were you at?
So I grew up in Slidell, which is really close to New Orleans.
That's where one of my good friends lives.
Is that right?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, I try and go back, as often. I love the.
Let me know
culture
next
and the
trip. I'm
food.
going with you.
Okay, we do it. Go to Bourbon. All right, so I get in trouble. I think I think that's an important consideration when thinking about whether blue catfish are actually influencing the Blackwater system. We hadn't caught one out there, and it's just not the right kind of area. Now on the Potomac, we definitely see a lot of them, and but that's just the right kind of system. On the Marshy Hope and Nanacoke, you see a lot of them.
How about
It's the right kind of
Pocomoke?
system. Yeah, so they've pulled out a few from the Pocomoke as well.
I was wondering about that because it being such a
yeah.
deep
Yeah,
river.
it's real deep water.
Yeah, that's what I was told. Now, no one shared any pictures with me, but I have seen the map, so people have reported them from that river. But I don't think that's as popular as a fishery as, say, Nanacoke or Marshy Hope is.
Oh,
so.
dang, Eddie, what'd you kick me for? I'm almost done. All right, one more question, Joe. I know Eddie wants to get this thing going. We're almost to an hour limit. We don't want to be over an hour.
Sorry,
so.
man. Sorry,
Okay, no,
sorry,
it's
sorry.
my fault
I'm a
because I always
talker.
have one more question. So,
Yeah.
okay, so this is the last question I want to ask you, Joe.
Okay.
Game fish. Everybody wants to talk about,
Yeah.
let's make snakeheads our new game fish. Joe, tell them.
Tell them about game fish. Look, I think it's great people want to go out and fish for them. I think it's great people want to go out and eat them. I think that's wonderful. And if you want to, you can catch and release that fish. There's no law that says you can't. But I don't think anyone really wants more government regulation on a fishery. It leads to confusion. It leads to people maybe not wanting to access that fishery. And it also is expensive because now you got to have a state coming in and doing studies to find out what that creel limit needs to be, what that size limit needs to be. And right now, there's no need for it. People only impose those regulations when there's a need for it, when that fish population is suffering, when the numbers of that fish are so low that government needs to step in and regulate it better. That ain't the problem with snakehead.
That's not the problem with snakeheads.
You don't have that problem with snakehead. So, unless you're a glutton for punishment, I don't understand why anyone would want to impose government regulation like size limits or creel limits on a population when there's no need for it, and it could only lead to more confusion and perhaps reduce accessibility to the fishery by the general public, and it's more expensive because who's paying for it?
That's
I know we're all paying for it.
Money,
yeah.
right.
We're talking about tax dollars.
Take that
going
money
into
and put it into some studying.
I would love. You know what? I'd love that. That's good. I'd love to have more money put into studying. That'd be good.
That's our goal, Joe. We're gonna find you some more money.
Or fishing derbies. We'll get a couple prizes together. Get people out there fishing more.
I had a couple banks in mind I was looking at, but Eddie said we had other resources available to get you some money. So.
We're working on it.
We'll get our legislation to get every kid that gets his driver's license at 16. Gets
Johnny
a fishing
Malps, come
rod
on, man, get us some money.
And 4 coupons for free minutes from the bait boys.
Damien, you're going out of business. You too, Cornflower. You better start doing 3 catfish guides a day, Jack.
Oh man,
It's a plan.
So, Kaz, you have.
I'm done. This is it. That was my last one. I promise.
So, I think we got everything under
I
control.
think this was a
Yeah,
great
so-
show. Hey, and
Yeah,
remember,
this was great, Joe.
make sure you
Thank you.
get my new shirt. I'll be releasing says Dr. Joe Knows. Okay.
Oh, it's gonna have a scribbled out face.
Right.
Or something.
Yes.
Yeah. I can't wait to see that.
Oh man,
Yeah, that's
so
good.
so I think that about wraps it up, guys. For Gary, for Kaz, Dr. Joe Love,
Peace out, guys.
and myself. Thank
Yep.
you all for watching. This was a great show. We'll see you next week.
Woo!